kani ohi awe hiwa no hoduai. Oh, wahio ka baliku ka bahaba. Baliku ka ba makaniku makua. Hakalita ohu leva ia e kalawa. Haka ano ole ke ia ohu no ke. Hakalala ke kia manui ka ohu i ka ohi aha mau. Me iho o ha mau ka leo ka le apane mai pahai ke ia mamoe.
Aloha mai. I'm Sam Gon, and I'm the Senior Scientist and Cultural Advisor for the Nature Conservancy of Hawaii. And here we are in the cloud forest of West Maui on the flank of Puu Kukui, which is the tallest peak in the West Maui Mountains. In ancient times, high elevation native forests like this would be considered wawakua, the realm of the gods. This would be a dichotomy in the Hawaiian way of looking at things. There would be the wawakua and the waukanaka, the realm of people. That would be in the lowlands where agriculture was occurring, where people had their homes, and next to the ocean with the fisheries there. The wawakua was considered the place where the plants that grew didn't grow as a result of human effort or intervention. We're standing on the edge of a really steep cliff, and yet that cliff is covered over in forest and thick vegetation. And if it weren't for that thick vegetation, the soil of that cliff would be rapidly eroding away into the ocean. It's just an amazing service that this cloud forest provides for all of us here. That's one of the primary reasons why we need to protect watershed forests such as this. It provides us with water, it provides us with erosion control. There's a whole suite of ecological services that watershed forests, in particular native watershed forests, provide for us here in Hawaii. This is a very special hike today. We're walking on a boardwalk that took many years to build. It protects the very delicate growth on the bottom of this forest, mosses and tiny ferns and other plants that together form the watershed of the West Maui Mountains. This boardwalk is here more for the protection of the forest than for our convenience. Without this boardwalk, our boots would be sinking into the mud, destroying the watershed structure, and then we'd start to see erosion and mud holes and all kinds of damage to this forest. This fern here is an amazing one. This one, the Hawaiian name of it is Wahine Noho Mauna, which means women living in the mountain or women sitting on the mountain. In this case, it's sitting on a tree trunk covered with moss up in the cloud forest of the West Maui Mountains. What an amazing ball of moss. Only in a cloud forest could you support this kind of growth. Most people know that hapu'u is a Hawaiian name for tree fern, but fewer people know that there are several different kinds of tree ferns and that Hawaiians had names for some of these. This one, for example, is hapu'u i'i. Hapu'u i'i has very dark purplish red bristly hairs at the base. Hapu'u pulu, which is another species of hapu'u and grows at lower elevation, has long golden soft hair. So this is ohelo kaula'au, which means ohelo placed in the forest groves. And indeed, in the forest is where this particular kind of ohelo grows. There's the other ohelo, the one that's a little shrub that grows in cinderlands around the volcano on the Big Island. And that one's fruit are sacred to the volcano goddess Pele. This is the ie. It's an interesting liana. It's a vine-like plant that grows in the forest and climbs up forest trees. We talk about the forest as Wawakua, the realm of the gods. The trees of the Wawakua are the body form of Ku, which is the god of governance and war and persistence. Whereas ie, because it is not an upright solid thing, it's a climbing thing, is kind of like the counterpart to Ku, and that is Lono. Ku was the akua that reigned over the time of warfare, and Lono was the akua that reigned over the time of peace. So it's interesting how the dualism in thought is matched by the nature of the different plants. Ku stands alone, resists, and Lono relies on others and climbs and cooperates. The plant that Hawaiians called moa, because it looks like the tail feathers of a rooster. Hawaiians played a game with the moa. Each moa branch is made up of several different sub-branches. And if you pick one of these pairs, and you would choose a nice strong one, and then you fit them in with another one, and then take the opposite ends, it's like pulling the wishbone. And whoever breaks is the loser. And whoever wins gets to crow like a rooster, which feeds into the name of moa. This one is Hoikuahivi. This is our briarless briar. Anywhere else in the world, this vine would be covered with thorns. In fact, that's what green briars are. They're very thorny plants, but the Hawaiian briar, Hoikuahivi, is completely without thorns. By the same token, we have nettleless nettles, raspless raspberries, and mintless mints, because all of those things, all of those features are defenses against browsing animals. And there were no browsing animals in ancient Hawaii. Those were brought in by people. Shortly after Western contact with the Hawaiian Islands, large animals, cows in particular, and goats were introduced to the Hawaiian Islands, and over 100 years of uncontrolled population growth, they largely denuded the forest from the lower elevations of the islands. It created a crisis, a watershed crisis. Streams were drying up, springs were drying up, because the forest was no longer present in order to intercept moisture and transfer it gradually into the earth. Instead, whenever it rained, it would just flood down to the sea, and none of the water was getting into our springs and into the aquifers where they need to be. As a result, there was an emergency declared at the turn of the 20th century. So in 1903, the forest reserves in Hawaii were established, and botanists went far and wide searching for fast-growing non-native trees from all over the world in order to revegetate the lower elevations of the Hawaiian Islands. But how successful were they? Certainly those forests exist and they provide a service, but when you think about it, the thousands of different plants all growing together in a complex structure that has evolved over millions of years is the best way to maintain watershed forests into the future. Amazing. So this is Pa'iniu, and this is a relative of lilies. It grows on the forest floor and in our wet forests of Hawaii. This one is really sensitive to disturbance by animals. Animals that trample the forest floor quickly destroy these plants. And so whenever you see a lot of Pa'iniu growing, you know that it's a place that has been protected from the damaging effects of introduced animals. This gate is along a line of fencing that keeps animals from lower elevations from moving up into the undamaged portions of the forest. As I mentioned earlier, the lower elevations of Hawaii have been extremely disturbed, and many of the non-native animals have the highest populations down there. As they attempt to move up the mountain and spread their damage, gates like this allow human access but keep the four-legged traffic out. So thanks for joining me on this very special visit to the West Maui Mountains and the cloud forest here. While not everybody can visit this very special place, we have to give thanks to the folks that have been tirelessly working to maintain this pristine example of ancient Hawaii. Mahalo. We're visiting this very important watershed through the courtesy of the Maui Land and Pineapple Company. They're the major managers of this particular portion of the West Maui Mountains. However, many of the landowners, including the Board of Water Supply, the state of Hawaii, and other landowners like Maui Land and Pineapple, have combined to form a watershed partnership that protects far more acres than any of them could working alone.